Today we're going to do a super deep dive into the DJI Avinox Drive System. We've put the motor through our dyno testing and we look at power measurements, at power consumption. We also investigate possible derating and heat management issues, and we've played around with the Avinox app, looking at how different parameters in there affect the power output of the drive system in our dyno testing. And of course, we've also put the drive system and the bike to the test out on the trails. Strap in, this is going to be a long one. So it's been a couple of months since DJI entered the e-bike market with their Avinox Drive System at Eurobike last year. I think it came as a surprise to pretty much everyone inside and outside of the industry. Not only the fact that DJI offers an e-bike drive system now, but also the numbers of the Avinox Drive. And let's talk about them real quick. Because we have a really lightweight and compact motor unit that weighs around 2.5, 2.6 kilograms, but has a claimed power output of 850 watts in standard mode and up to 1000 watts in its boost mode, and offers 100 Newton meters or 120 Newton meters of torque respectively. These numbers would be impressive like on their own, but combined in such a small, lightweight, compact package is something we've never seen before. Same goes for the batteries. DJI offers two of them with 600 and 800 watt hours. They both offer really good energy density. They beat the newer Bosch batteries with 600 and 800 watt hours when it comes to that, and they're on par with the best on the market. Right now, the only bike you can get with the DJI Avinox Drive System is the Amflow PL Carbon, and it comes in two different specs. It's an mountain bike, trail bike with 160 millimeters of travel up front and 150 in the back. And like the drive unit, its specs are pretty impressive because the weight starts at around 19 kilos with a smaller battery and around 20 kilos for the 800 watt hour battery. But we'll talk about the bike itself really quick later in the video. For now, let's focus on the drive unit, and I'd say let's dive straight into it because, well, dyno testing and test benches is kind of our thing. So we did the same with the DJI Avinox system. And before we start with the numbers and the measurements, I'll give you some context because of course, we tried to get our hands on one of the Amflow test bikes as soon as possible after Eurobike. And we managed to do that. And we've put that through our dyno testing in autumn last year. And we also published a video on that on our German main channel. But after that, we talked with DJI and we came to the realization that some of the things we measured back then were down to a really early software because it was one of the first production units of the Amflow bike we tested and still had some, well, let's not call it bugs, but software quirks. And DJI, in the meantime, released multiple software updates to fix some of the issues. And we recently did a retest of most of the things we did with a newer bike with the 800 watt hour battery, because the first one we did was with the 600 watt hours battery, and with the most recent software that's from December 2024. So to all of those out there who watched our German video, like the first one, stay tuned because you're gonna be in for some surprises today in this video. Because obviously I'm gonna focus on the most recent software and the most recent test bike because, well, that's the one you're gonna be riding out there, or you're gonna be updating to if you have one of the really early bikes. So now, without further ado, let's start. For our power measurements, we look at the output power of the motor itself in relation to the input power of the rider. So how does the power output ramp up the stronger you pedal, the more power you put on your pedal while you're out on the trail or on the way to the trail? And looking at this graph, you might be wondering why we chose the window we did, starting with 50 watts of input power at the low end and up to around 300 watts of input power max. There's a reason for that. You might not be able to see it with the Avinox motor because, as you can see, it already outputs almost max power at just 50 watts of input power. We're already above 600 watts of motor power at just 50 watts of input. Just to put that into context, 50 watts of input power, that's not a lot. It's barely above putting your feet on the pedals and just let your feet drop on them. So there's really not a lot of power, and you're already getting most of the output power. That's in the turbo mode, mind you. So we measure all of our drive units in the turbo mode. That's just for better comparability. Because if we chose one of the other assistance modes, it just too complicated because they're just tuned too differently for different drive units, be it Shimano, Bosch, or Brose, or Pinion, or whatever. We couldn't compare them if we just chose one of the lower assistance modes. That's why we always go for turbo. And yes, as you can see, there's not a lot happening in the window we chose for our graph here. But when we look at the other drive units we just talked about, the other mainstream units out there, you can see why we chose the window we did and how different and how impressive the DJI Avinox really is. Because at just 50 watts of input power, like the lowest one we've measured, we're already above the power a lot of the other motors output max. So that's just, it's mind-blowing. However, I'm not sure if it's really a good thing, because in practice, like when you're out on the trail, it really feels like that. There's just an abundance of power and you have to be able to handle that. Your bike, your rear tire, all of like the whole system has to be able to handle that kind of power in the turbo mode. But we talk about my impressions from the field a little bit later in the video. We'll stick to the numbers for a bit longer. Next, we look at max power output. And as you can see, the Avinox is almost our most powerful unit we've tested, or maybe it is because we're going to talk about the boost mode in a second. But in the like standard mode without boost, it's almost the most powerful motor. There's the TQ HPR 120S, but that's a whole different beast. It's 4 kilos heavy. There's not really any bike you can get with the motor anymore. That's just not. But so just to put that into perspective, it's vastly more powerful than everything Bosch has to offer, or Shimano, or Pinion. Like it's on a different level. The only ones that come kind of close are the Sachs RS motor or the Panasonic GX Ultimate, but they're also not that close. And it becomes even more obvious when we activate the boost mode. You can activate it through the remote on your handlebar, and it goes on for 30 seconds and you can just continuously boost. So just after the boost mode stops, you can activate it again and again and again. So in theory, you could go boost all the time. You just have to press like the boost button every 30 seconds. And if you look at the power output here, we're so much above anything else on the market. And on our test bench, we almost hit the claimed 1000 watts of output power. We didn't quite make it, probably because those 1000 watts DJI claims are electrical output power, like the power the system draws from the battery. And what we measure is like the mechanical power on the rear wheel, minus like drive unit and tire and so on. So we measure mechanical output power of the drive unit, and 950 watts is, again, mind-blowing. And mind-blowing, I'm probably going to use that word a little bit more in the next couple of minutes because it really is. However, usually that kind of power comes with trade-offs. We're going to talk about two of them for now. First, we talk about heat and derating, because if you output that much power, there's gonna be heat. Like the motor is gonna get hot, the battery is gonna get hot because it's a 36 volt system, so not 48 volts or even more. It's like the traditional 36 volt system, and you're drawing a lot of power from that battery in boost mode and also in regular turbo mode. How does the system handle that? To measure that, we have I'd call it torture test. We put the bike on our dyno and we put 250 watts of input power on the crank. We simulate a gradient of 8 to 10%, and then we just go without pause, as long as it can. Like a straight 250 watts of input power, you have to be really fit to be able to push that without, dropping even 10 watts. To simulate some airflow, because every drive unit is going to need that for cooling, we put a fan like straight in front of the motor, so it can kind of simulate realistic conditions. And if you look at the numbers, that's like 15 minutes of that torture test, like 250 watts of input power. We can see differences, like the Avinox behaves differently from pretty much any other system on the market, because you can see the output kind of fluctuates a little bit. It's not as consistent and steady as with most other systems. You have some variation, so the motor goes down a little bit and then ramps back up. But as you can see, after 15 minutes, it's still up there. And you just saw the numbers, like the power output numbers. And if we're going to lose like 10% of that, that's basically not nothing, but it's still more powerful than any other system out there. So it's impressive what we're seeing here, because most other systems, as you can see in the graph, they start to throttle from like 10, 12 minutes. They start to drop in power. That goes for Bosch, for Bose, for Shimano, but Shimano handles it a little bit differently. You have really sharp drop-offs, and then it ramps back up really sharply again. Pinion is really consistent when it comes to thermals, probably because of the little bit bigger housing, because there's the whole gearing in there as well. It handles heat a lot better than a lot of other drive systems, but the Avinox, it's impressive. But we were curious, and we just said, there's so much power, it just can't work like that. So we went even longer and just continued the torture test on and on. And now I have to look back at our first test bike last year again, like with the really early software and the 600 watt-hour battery. Because what we saw then is that just after 20 minutes, the system shut off completely. Like it turned off, there was no assistance anymore, and we had an error message on the display. And we couldn't even turn it back on, or we could turn it back on, but there was the error still there, no assistance, we couldn't even charge the system. So it just shut off completely with an error and had to cool down until we could use the bike again, after a little bit more than 20 minutes. However, like I just said, it's a torture test. It's highly unlikely that you're gonna see anything like this out in the field. Like it's gotta be a really hot day, a really fit rider, and a long ascent to see something like that. DJI since then worked on this behavior and improved it vastly, because we did the same test again with our Eurotest bike with a bigger battery. That's a little bit better in handling that kind of power draw, and the newer software. And now we can see it goes on like this for over 40 minutes. So that's like way beyond anything you're gonna see like out in the field. It's not gonna happen. Like you're not gonna get the system to shut off like this. The numbers are gonna be a little bit shorter for the 600 watt-hours battery. It's not gonna be as short as what we've seen with the old software. Like it's gonna be longer than those 20 minutes. It's probably gonna be around half an hour. That's what DJI claims when we talk to them. And I think that's pretty realistic. And in both cases, like for the 600 and the 800 watt-hour battery, I'd say derating and heat management is not an issue. And that's, again, really impressive. And there's the word again, it's mind-blowing. Because we also checked the temperature of the housing with our thermal camera, and it's not even getting hotter than any other like motor on the market. So it's just a really efficient system, it seems, to be able to output that kind of power in such a small package. Hats off to DJI, that's really well done. Next up in our testing is range and power consumption. I could show you some numbers right now. We did that in our first German video on the Avinox Drive System, but I'm not going to do that today. Sorry about that. But there's a reason for that. Let me explain real quick. In the past, we've done those kind of range tests or power consumption measurements, but we're not able to measure the power draw for you or for you or for you, because there's so many different factors at play here. It comes down to your tires, the terrain you're on. Are you riding on gravel, on trail, or on the road? Are you, how much pressure is in your rear tire? How are you pedaling? Do you really, stump or not? What assistance level are you using? There's so many factors. And we've done this with so many different systems. And what we've come to realize is, in the end, it always boils down to one really simple rule. The more power the motor outputs, the more power it draws from the battery. I know it sounds obvious, but that's just how it is. Yes, there are slight differences between the different motors or drive units, but they're so much smaller, those differences, than like a different rear tire, for example. So what does that mean for the Avinox Drive System? Well, we've seen the numbers, and obviously it means that if you push this motor, this drive system, the Amflow bike, to its limits, if you ride a lot of turbo, use the boost motor, you're gonna like kill your 800 watt-hour battery in no time. Like, you're not gonna get great range from that because you're just using so much power. That means if you want to get great range from the Avinox system, you can, but you have to adjust your assistance levels. You might have to ride in auto mode or trail mode, maybe even adjust those modes via the Avinox app. Depending on your preferences and what you want from a bike and what kind of range you want to see, you just really have to test that yourself. What I can tell you though is if you want like similar power output to, for example, a Bosch CX motor, you can expect a similar power draw from that. So that's really everything I can say when it comes to range and power consumption. I know that might be disappointing for some of you, and I can understand that, but I just don't feel comfortable communicating numbers when it comes to range or power consumption when I just know better. I know they might just not be relevant for you. We've also looked at the power output from a different perspective, not in relation to the input power, but to the input cadence. So how does cadence influence the power output of the motor of the Avinox system? And as you can see in the graph, it's kind of sensitive to different cadences. It already is like pretty decent from lower cadences around 50 or 60, but it ramps up with higher cadences. So it really benefits from higher cadences if you really want to get the most power out of the system. But you're already okay with lower cadences. And as you can see, you're still fine way above 120 RPM. You might wonder if that's really relevant because, well, 120, 130 RPM, there's not a lot of people who pedal like that, like fast like that. But you have to remember it might come down, to just some really short bursts where you need that kind of cadence to maybe pedal up a small step or up some rooty section on a trail where you just have to do that for maybe like 2, 3, 4 seconds. And then you need that kind of power. And when we look at other drive systems, how they handle that, we can see, for example, that the Shimano EP801 really struggles with this higher cadence numbers. And that's something you can really feel when you ride with a bike with a Shimano drive unit. This really short bursts of power, it's going to drop like instantly. And you might get stuck on the trail. We can also see like there's nothing as consistent as the Bosch drive units. They already reached their max power output around 60 RPM, and then they just stay there. There's no fluctuation. And that's a nice feeling because it's easy to get into it and you know how your motor reacts. It takes a little bit more time with drive units like the Avinox or, for example, the Pinion MGU, because they both like the power output changes with your cadence and you have to get used to that, and it takes a little bit more practice. The Bosch unit is a little bit more consistent when it comes to that, but that might also come down a little bit to preference. Next up, let's talk Avinox App real quick, because you can change different motor settings, parameters. How does it behave when you ride? So you can adjust the max torque, you can adjust the max power output, you can adjust the overrun, and you can also adjust the assistance. There's like 4 assistance levels. It's auto, eco, trail, and turbo. These are the standard modes, and you can adjust each of them. 2 of them are, let's call them dynamic, the trail mode and the auto mode. Dynamic means you can adjust a range of your assistance modes. Like there's assistance modes from 1 to 15, and you can, for example, for the trail mode, you could choose assistance levels 7 to 10. That means that the Avinox system decides for you which assistance level it picks depending on your riding situation. It is mainly influenced by the gradient. It uses the sensors inside of the system to determine if you're going up the hill like really steep, or if you're on the trail going down, or you're just in the flat. And it picks the right assistance level for you. depending on how you set that parameter in the app. That's true for the trail mode and the auto mode. For the turbo and the eco, there's just one assistance level, and the gradient doesn't matter. And we decided to put that to the test. Not the picking of the assistance mode, but how does the power output change in different assistance levels. And when we look at the graphs now, we chose to do the test with assistance level 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15. And as you can see, with lower numbers, you get a lot flatter curves. So you need a lot of more input power to reach the max power output of the drive system. So it feels a lot more sporty, a lot more dynamic and natural. And as you can already hear, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video, I much prefer that feeling. I would never go above an assistance level of 10 for the Avinox system, because to me that doesn't feel like riding a bike anymore. I can understand those people who think that's kind of fun, because it is, honestly, but not for everyday riding. It's, a nice party trick. The drive system just goes like crazy, but that's not what I want from, the bike I ride every day. So I personally would never go above an assistance level of 10, maybe even a little bit below that, because you can hit those impressive power numbers. You just have to do a little bit more, and it feels a lot better. And also, as a plus, the modulation, which is good, especially considering how powerful the unit is, but it gets better with lower assistance levels. And also, obviously, the power consumption is a lot lower because, well, you put in a lot more power and the drive unit outputs less power, so you're not gonna drain your battery as fast. So I would suggest just try, if you own an Amflow bike or any other bike in the future with an Avinox system, just adjust your assistance via the app, because you're going to benefit from it. Last but not least, we're going to look at cutoff behavior of the drive system. That means, how does the drive unit handle when you hit your speed limit? It's 25 kilometers an hour for the EU. It might be 20 miles an hour for other regions, but it doesn't really matter what kind of number it is. But we wanted to look at how does it handle this cutoff. And as you can see in the graph, it starts reducing power at around 24, a little bit over 24 kilometers an hour, and then it fades out pretty consistently and pretty slowly until, well, it shuts off just above 26.5 kilometers an hour. That's the legal limit for the EU. It feels really good when you're just riding. It's really smooth. It fades out really, really pleasantly. And it feels a little bit different from other drive units. And you can also see that because let's show the Bosch CX Gen 5, how that handles this cutoff. And as you can see, it's a lot more sudden. It's a hard cutoff. It still feels fine with the Bosch unit, but you can really feel it. It's still a little bit like the feeling you're hitting a wall. There's always two sides, because if you are someone who's, a lot of in the flat and you always at the speed limit, you're gonna be faster with the Bosch CX Gen 5 because it's cutting off later. The DJI Avinox system, it's gonna cut off a little bit earlier. You have to do more to still stay in that 25.5 kilometers an hour range. Well, with the Bosch, you're gonna get, different cutoff behavior. But to me personally, I prefer the way DJI handles it. The benchmark, in that respect, we unfortunately don't have the numbers for that, but I really like how Shimano handles that, because you can adjust the cutoff behavior of the Shimano EP801 and the EP6 drive units in the Shimano eTube app. So you can choose if you want a slow fade out or you just want a hard cutoff. And I'd love to see that with the DJI as well in the future. Before we talk about my impressions from the trail, let's talk charging, because that's one of the, I think, big highlights of the Avinox Drive System, because every Amflow PL carbon bike, maybe also any other bike that in the future comes with the drive system, I'm not sure about that, but I think it's kind of safe to say that they're going to come with a 12 ampere charger. It's a GAN charger, really modern charging technology, something from your laptop, from your MacBook, the really small high-density chargers that are really small and heavy. And 12 ampere, that's a lot of juice. If you compare that to, for example, Bosch, the fastest or most powerful charger Bosch offers has 4 ampere, and All other systems, they have like a max of 6 ampere. In practice, that means that you're gonna charge your 800 or 600 watt hour battery in no time. We did the test. We also measured like the power draw from the charger. We unfortunately only have numbers for the 600 watt hour battery, and we hit like 10 amperes of charging with this one. And DJI says that we're gonna hit the 12 ampere only with the 800 watt hour battery because it can take more power. And that also means that the time it takes to charge is identical between the 600 and the 800 watt hour battery, because the 800 watt hour battery is gonna be charged, faster, like in the same time but faster, if that makes sense. And it means that if you compare that to the Bosch battery, we did the same test with a 600 watt hour Bosch battery. It takes pretty much double the time to charge the battery. And that makes a huge difference. Probably not for everyone, not for every kind of rider or riding, but that means that you could charge your bike during your lunch break. If you're doing a really big ride in the morning somewhere in the mountains and you deplete your battery, you just take a little bit longer lunch break, about an hour, have something to eat, recharge, and you can recharge your bike at the same time and you're good to go for the rest of the day. You couldn't do that with any other bike on the market. And I really, really, really hope to see the same thing from other companies in the future. I know that it's kind of niche and kind of special, but I think it's something you get used to really quick, and it's a good thing to have. So the fast charging is an absolute game changer. Okay, now we've talked a lot about the numbers, the theory. Let's talk about how does it feel while riding. I made some remarks here and there, what I think, but in general, it's the same thing that what we've just talked about. This is a really impressive drive system, also in practice, on the trail or on the road. Because even though you have a really powerful unit, it still feels good and there's still really good modulation. It's tough in the higher assistance levels, like in turbo mode. You saw the numbers, and the modulation just can be just so good because you're gonna hit like crazy output numbers and crazy power on your rear wheel, and especially if it's slippery outside, if it's wet, and especially with the rear tire on the Amflow PL Carbon, and we're going to talk about that just in a minute. It's going to slip, even though the drive unit handles like wheel slip with a kind of wheel slip protection, stuff like that. But in general, what I want to say, modulation, really good. The feeling of the assistance, it kind of depends a little bit on the assistance level you're in, because in turbo mode, for me, it doesn't feel natural anymore. It's not what I look for when I look for an e-mountain bike or when I go out riding an e-mountain bike. It's just my personal preference. All of it is pretty much just my personal preference. But in the lower assistance levels, like especially in the trail mode, if you tune that down just a tiny, tiny bit, that's what I did, you have an awesome modulation. You have still really, really high power output. You blaze up like really steep ascents with you almost hit your speed limit. Well, with other full power systems, no matter if it's Bosch, Shimano, Pinion, no matter, you struggle on those climbs and you're probably like 10, 15 kilometers an hour, and like with a heart rate of 150 or 140. With the Avinox, you just go up, and that's crazy. And I talked to some of my colleagues, and I said, when you go back from the Avinox to another full power e-bike or e-mountain bike, it feels like going from a regular full power e-bike to a light assist bike. That's how big the difference really is. So DJI really did it. They managed to balance out the high power output with good modulation and a natural riding feeling in most of the assistance levels. And yeah, I didn't expect that when I just saw the numbers, that it's just so good. Let's talk about noise in two different scenarios. Let's talk about noise uphill. It's fine, I'd say. It can be really quiet, especially if you don't push the drive unit as hard, like on the lower assistance modes. It's almost silent, especially if you're off-road, like if there's some gravel under your tires, you almost don't hear the motor noise. if you really push it, you can hear it. Like there's kind of an electric noise. And it's also not as consistent as with other drive units, especially like the newer Bosch CX Gen 5, which is really well behaved when it comes to noise. And the Avinox is a little bit higher pitched when it comes to its tonality, and it changes a little bit more with different power output and cadence. So if you go up like technical uphill trails, you might hear like this whine from the motor itself. It's not distracting. It's not nearly as bad as it was, for example, the older Bosch CX Gen 4 that was really annoying for me when it comes to tonality and sound. The Avinox is a lot better. It's not as good as the newer Bosch CX Gen 5. However, that one's not nearly as powerful as the Avinox, so it's probably not a fair comparison. But I think most people won't mind the motor noise from the Avinox. When it comes to the noise down the hill or on the trail, there's slight motor rattle. It's really minor. It's hard to tell because our first test bike, like the early one we had really terrible like rattle from the cables inside the frame. The new one was better. There was still some slight rattling from the cables. It was okay though. And the motor unit experiences some like really small rattle. You can also hear it if you just take your cranks and just put a little bit pressure on it, like do that rattle test. You can hear it, but you can only hear it like in very, very few scenarios, because a lot of the time the wind in your ears is going to be a lot louder, so you're not going to hear that. I think there's rattle, yes, but it's not a problem. Like it's not nearly as bad as with the Shimano EP801 and not nearly as bad as with the older Bosch CX motors. And I really don't think anyone will be bothered by that. But now that I've already touched on, the noise from the cables in the bike, let's talk Amflow PL Carbon just really quick, because it's the only bike you can get with the Avinox system now, like in the beginning of 2025. There's more in the pipeline. We know about Forbidden, maybe Uno, like the Spanish boutique brand, maybe more, or I'm pretty sure there's more soon, but for now it's only the Amflow. So let's talk about the bike just really quick. It's a capable trail bike, really lightweight, really nimble. It handles great on flowy terrain, but it's not an enduro bike. That you can see that in the spec already, like the tires, for example, especially the rear tire. I don't get why they spec the rear tire, or no, I get why they did that, because they say, well, the Amflow PL Carbon, it's just a trail bike with a little bit more travel, like 160 and 150 millimeters. However, if you output that much power, you are gonna need a grippy rear tire if you want to tackle like uphill terrain on the trail. So anyone who wants to do that kind of stuff with the Amflow PL Carbon, you really got to switch out that Maxxis dissector on the rear for a burlier tire. Apart from that, it's a fun bike if you don't push it too hard. I didn't mind the flexi frame as much as others did with my like just above 80 kilos and the way I'm riding and the terrain I'm riding. I wasn't like, it didn't bother me as much. I could feel it, but it wasn't like terrible. I struggled a little bit more with the feel of the rear suspension. It felt kind of harsh to me. In some cases, especially if you put a lot of power on your cranks, like on flatter terrain, flatter trails, you can feel like a pretty strong pedal kickback. It's probably comes down to personal preferences again, but to me, the flexi frame wasn't an issue. I just didn't like the rear suspension a lot. For the kind of terrain it's built for, like as a fun trail bike, it's really great. You just have to switch out that rear tire. What we didn't really talk about is the display and the remotes on the handlebar and stuff like that. You probably know that from other reviews out there already. In short, it's great. Like all of it is great. They did a really good job. I love the display. I love its matte finish. It's readable in almost all conditions. The touch works really well, even if it's wet, even if you're wearing gloves. It's a great all-around package. And honestly, it's the kind of thing I'd like to see in a high-end e-mountain bike in the year 2025 or 2024. And I really hope that this kind of stuff is going to push other manufacturers to do a little bit more when it comes to that. All right, let's wrap it up. That was a lot of input. Thanks to everyone and anyone who stuck around. until now. But I want to say one or two more things before we end this video. First of all, if you like this video and the last one we did on the Bosch CX Gen 5 motor and want to see more like this, hit that subscribe button, hit the like, because we have more drive units in the pipeline, also newer ones that are yet to be announced for this channel. So if you don't want to miss that, subscribe. It's going to really help us out. Coming back to the Avinox Drive System. Like I said, it's impressive and it's mind-blowing. It would be an impressive drive system for any of the big names on the market. But it's even more so from a newcomer, like to the e-bike and bike market in general. I didn't expect that. I just want to make that clear before we go on, because I also have one or two things that they don't worry me, but I think about them a lot. So first of all is it's a newcomer, like I said, and we don't know what the reliability of the drive unit looks like. For now, it seems to be pretty good. From what I've read, like on the net, there's not a lot of issues with the whole system or the motor. Sure, there are some issues, but that's true for like any of tech. There's always going to be problems, but it seems pretty good so far. We don't know how it fares in the long run. We have just to wait and see. You just have to keep that in mind. The same goes for the service. How DJI will handle that also down the road. That also seems to be pretty good for now, but I don't know what it looks like in 2, 3, 4 years down the line when your drive unit fails. We'll have just to wait and see. I don't want to say that it's not going to be good. It's just something you have to think about when you decide to get like any product from like a new manufacturer to the space. And the last thing I want to touch on really quick is how much power is too much power. Because, first of all, just really practical, if you ride a bike with the Avinox system and you like to push it like all the time, your chain, your cassette, your chainring, they're going to suffer if you put like 800 watts or even 1,000 watts of power into that consistently. You just have to be aware of that. That's the one thing. And the other thing is, I've talked about it a little bit during the video. I'm not sure if this is what I want from an e-mountain bike. If I, want to go out riding, it's personal preference. But I worry a little bit because the hype this product generated in the industry, and I mean, it created hype for me, for you, and a lot of people talk about it. I just fear that we're gonna end up in, an arms race for the most powerful drive unit out there. That, Bosch, Shimano, Bros, Pinion, they're all gonna try and match that. And obviously it's cool to have that, but there's always trade-offs to something like that. Be it maybe regulation, maybe struggles with modulation, energy consumption, cost, weight. I'm pretty fine with the power the other mainstream drive units had so far. I didn't need more of that. However, I appreciate what DJI is doing, not only when it comes to power, but also when it comes to the app, to really, really quick software updates, fixing bugs, adding features, to the fast charging, to connectivity, to a nice modern display, stuff like that. That's something that I appreciate more than just the power the motor offers. And my hope is that this kind of thing pushes the whole industry forward, because all the big names, they're feeling the pressure right now. Maybe not when it comes to numbers, because they have more bikes out there than Amflow or DJI right now. However, we're not sure if that's going to be true 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So they know they have to do something. And I really hope they draw the right conclusions from that. That it's not just about the power, but about giving people, riders, features they have asked for a long time. And the established manufacturers, they struggled to do that. They hesitated for whatever reason, and I hope they catch up. They do something, they innovate, because that's gonna help all of us, like you, us, and everyone else involved. And that's really all I have to say now to end the video. I mean, it's a positive note to end the video on. Thank you guys for watching. If there's still anyone there watching, let me know in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Like I said, we have some more tests like this in the pipeline. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks, but stay tuned. Exciting stuff coming up. See you then. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.